I'm Dr. David Croto, and I'm here today with Dr. Steve Johnson to talk about why guilt does not work to change our behavior.
Right.
So, Dr. Johnson, from a psychological perspective, what is guilt and what are the consequences of experiencing guilt?
Dr. Croto, that is a dangerous question for a psychologist, but let me give it a shot. There are three parts to guilt, right? One would be an inference. An inference is just a thought that gives meaning to a situation, or you could think of it as an interpretation of an event, a situation, or some state of affairs. And the inference with guilt is that I have done something wrong, something that is important to me I have done wrong, like a violation of my ethical code or my moral principles. That's not enough. That alone will not have a person experience guilt. We need to add to that certain kinds of beliefs, and the chief among those beliefs would be this demand. I should not have done that, right? I absolutely should not have done that. And then, to seal the deal, we'll add a few more beliefs to that. Typically it's not uncommon, it's not necessary, but it's not uncommon for the person to believe that this is terrible, it's horrible, it's awful. And then a little frustration and intolerance around that. This is too much, I can't stand it, I can't stand the fact that I even did this. And the heart of guilt is global negative self-rating. You put the self down. I'm a loser. I'm nothing but a total miserable sinner, not in the theological sense, but just in a global sense. And that combination will do it. The third part of that is with every emotion, and guilt's an emotion, so with every emotion, there's what we would call an action or a behavioral tendency. And the behavioral tendency with guilt would be that self-punishment, or it's strange, but it's kind of like anxiety this way, is often avoidance. If I've made myself feel guilty about something, I may want to avoid that or avoid those who are involved in that. One consequence is that typically when we feel guilty, we get tired of feeling guilty. And so we'll have frustration and intolerance about our guilt. This is too much, I can't stand this, etc., right? And so we will, maybe beat up on this self, such a loser, etc. And we keep doing this, and we'll feel worse and worse and worse, but then we'll say, we'll probably act out again as a result of that. If I could give a real quick example. Sure. For example, in addiction, many addicts will say, I'm not going to drink, or whatever the substance is, right? And then they do it. And so they feel guilty, they beat up on themselves, I've messed up my life and everybody's life, I've contributed to the misery of the world, etc. And if they can continue to do this and make themselves feel really, really bad, then the thought pops into their head, but there's always one thing that makes me feel better. And that is to take a drink, right? Right? And so guilt kind of works in the same way. There's one thing that makes me feel better, and usually it's the sin. So that's why we kind of return to the scene of the crime when it comes to guilt. And the other one is that guilt is so utterly, almost narcissistically focused on the self, right? But the self is the problem there. We want to get off the self and not be so self-focused, okay? Because if we stick with the self, we're not going to solve the problem.
Okay. So if guilt tends to lead to dysfunctional behavior, right, what's a better alternative?
Big surprise, as Christians, it is remorse, right? Mm-hmm. But how do those two differ? Yeah. Because sometimes, we're kind of sloppy in language, but we pretend we're a science in psychotherapy, and so we try to be a little more precise. And so those three parts, the inference, the beliefs, and the action potential, if we look at how guilt and remorse differ, the inference is the same, right? I've done something that is a violation of my moral or ethical code. Boom. The second, the beliefs are radically different, And I'll get to that in a minute. And then the action potential is going to be so different. So instead of the demand, we go, man, I wish I hadn't done that. So we might replace the demand with a wish, a hope, a desire. And as Christians, hopefully that's a godly desire, right? About what we're doing. Instead of awfulizing, that's not good, right? Acknowledge that it's not good, but don't waste the time on the awfulizing. Frustration and tolerance. Yeah, it may feel like I can't stand it, but actually I am standing it. I'm just making myself miserable about it. And then the action potential is that if I'm, instead of wallowing in the guilt and beating myself up, is we go and try to make amends if we can. And if we can't, then we make a commitment that we'll try to do better the next time.
Okay. So then what can we do to try to increase our remorse and then either decrease or maybe even eliminate guilt?
One thing that we can do, well, let me give several things here. One, first, acknowledge that you did do the bad thing. Because a lot of people feel guilty, and so one of the ways that they deal with it is, nope, I didn't do that. You're the one that made me do that. Acknowledge that you did it. Take responsibility for that. And then kind of embrace this desire, not a demand, because if you put a demand on yourself, you're never going to live up to the demand. But if you embrace this realistic desire, right, to do differently, then that's a step in the right direction. Don't waste time on the awfulizing and the catastrophizing, etc. It's bad. We've acknowledged that. Let's move on.
Catastrophizing?
Okay? Catastrophizing is from a similar model than the one I use, but I just want to say good things about them, right? Okay. So catastrophizing is to say that this is pretty much the same thing, that it's a catastrophe rather than awful, terrible, etc. But they're pretty much synonymous. So don't waste time on that. Focus on, who I like in Scripture who does it? I mean, we've got David, right? Murder, adultery, kind of big ones. He had just cause to feel guilty if anybody did. But then there's this wonderful verse, wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. For me, that is the difference between the two. One is utterly self-focused. The other one is focusing outside the self and really relying upon the connection with God, right? The other one is accept yourself as God accepts you. Right? Most of us, especially if we're serious, and then if you're feeling guilty about stuff, then you're pretty serious about what you're doing in life anyway. So we can be much harder on ourselves than we would on someone else. But if we can learn how to kind of forgive ourselves in the way that God forgives us, or even see that not even that sin is going to break the relationship with God, that's a big step. That's a big step too. And the next one may seem strange, but act as if you felt that God had forgiven you, and act as if you had totally forgiven yourself. And you go, what do you mean? You're trying to play a game with yourself or fooling yourself? No. What we have found in psychology is sometimes it's easier to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. And AA, they say fake it till you make it. I don't say that. I have another word for that, and that's called hope. So we live into the reality that we desire, that we wish that we had. We may not be there yet, but that's what we wish. And the other thing is, be sure that you put it into action. It's not enough to believe that you are forgiven or to believe that you have fully forgiven yourself. That's a step. Instead of believing that, it would be nice if we believed in acting out of our forgiveness, and that nothing will separate us from God. Now, those are some ideas that might help us move more toward remorse than guilt.
Okay. Well, one more question for you here.
Yeah.
And that is, as you're talking about guilt, I keep thinking of Marie from Everybody Loves Raymond and how she makes everyone feel so guilty. Why is it you think that some people, they just thrive on trying to make others feel guilty? Why do people default to that?
I think sometimes people do this because they're hard on themselves, and so it shifts that over to focusing on someone else. But often we do something that I don't think is really great, and that is we waste time rating ourselves. We usually call that self-esteem. That is, try to rate ourselves higher than we would normally rate ourselves, or rate you lower than I would normally rate myself. I think the solution to that is just don't rate yourself. Accept yourself as God accepts you. Rate your behavior within whatever role you're involved in. Like, I'm a father, and so rate my fatherly behavior in terms of what my goal would be as a father, and then rate, am I moving toward that goal or away from that goal? So some people want to feel good about themselves by rating themselves high or rating others low, but it won't work if you don't buy into it, right? Yeah, I think that's probably the easiest way to make sense out of that.
That's really helpful. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.